Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us to the very end. So we're here for the last session, and very excited about the next session. We have a panel discussion with a group of speakers that bring another perspective. So we have entrepreneurs from industry, people who are sitting between industry and the producer community and the producer community here representing. There's been lots of talk about actually engaging the farmers and the producer community. So we wanted to do that with our final panel session. So if you've just joined us, my name is Professor Stacey Scott. I'm a professor of computer science from the University of Guelph. I'll be introducing the next panelists. I will start off with a couple prepared questions, and then we'll open the floor to audience questions. So please feel free to enter your questions in the chat. There won't be any slides here. So if I just ask all our panelists to turn their cameras on. I can't see everyone. Let's see. Zoom is giving me this weird view. Yeah, okay, there we go. And
I don't know how to create the three people.
let's see, in your view, sorry, we're just gonna try to adjust the view so that all of our speakers are maybe a multi-speaker view. Try that. We'll see how this works. We'll see whether it we'll go from here. The Zoom's not always the best interface. Maybe the speaker, maybe try the speaker view. No, that's not gonna work. Okay, we'll just go to the multi-speaker view. Try that. Sorry about that, everyone. Every time we do one of these sessions, you think the technologists, we would know how to do it better. Okay, so first I will do our introductions. I am very happy to introduce Dr. Sherry Vanderpoel. She's a founder and CEO of CATTLEytics from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Sherry's a doctor of veterinary medicine with a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. So she's really bringing multiple disciplines together. She has a keen interest in innovation and technological improvement within agriculture. In 2014, she started CATTLEytics, which provides hardware, software, and system solutions to facilitate improving decision-making in the animal health industry. So welcome, Dr. Vanderpoel. Our next panelist is Ms. Kelly Somerville, who is an industry services manager at the Livestock Research Innovation Corporation, or LRIC, in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. Kelly has a bachelor's degree in agriculture and has worked in various roles in agricultural service, policy, and management. She's also a cattle owner, so she co-owns a small herd of purebred Angus cattle and is currently serving as Vice President of the Ontario Angus Association. Welcome. And our final panelist is Ms. Chris Petite. She's a dairy producer at Mistyglen Creamery. She's owner-operator of Mistyglen in Belmont, Ontario, Canada. Mistyglen is a 50-ish dairy cow operation. They run a robotic milk farm. Under Chris's innovative leadership, their dairy operation was expanded in 2022 to include an on-dairy processing plant and retail outlet. They make and sell a variety of dairy products, including milk, chocolate milk, hugely popular cheese curds, and most recently, probiotic yogurt. They also sell food products from other locations, other local farms. As an agri-food entrepreneur, Chris gets to combine her deep passion and experience. She was born and raised on a farm, in farming and in her professional experience in medical safety and high quality client care as a registered nurse. And I also want to point out a very fun, interesting, maybe terrifying fact of the Mistyglen Creamery. And Chris could possibly provide more insight on this, but while researching the creamery, I found out that while they were developing, renovating their barn, it was hit by a tornado twice during the development process, or the redesign process. So that is quite a feat to actually get your creamery up and running while you're running and operating dairy farm. So thank you very much. Please welcome all the panelists. So I'll start out with our first question. And perhaps we'll start with Sherry as our first panelist. From your perspective, what are the most promising digital technologies that you know about that could improve farm animal welfare in Canada?
Thanks so much, Stacey. So as far as that goes, I mean, there's so many exciting technologies. There's computer vision, there's new and better sensors. We're talking about machine learning, but as you mentioned, I did engineering first, and part of that was a program called Engineering Society, where we had a lot of courses in sustainability, and it really made an impact on me that there was quite a few thinkers who had it, who didn't believe that technology was neutral. And what I mean by that is it's not technology could be created for good or evil. It's not necessarily, a broom is a broom. And one of the examples of this, which maybe is a little bit not quite how it seems, would be things like, bridges that are built, too low for buses to get through. And that could prevent, people being able to actually access a park. And that was one of the famous examples given, that technology, which was that bridge, actually in its design, actually inherently was used against people potentially. And there's a bit more complexity to that example, but I think what we have to do is we have to look at technology as a way to bake in the animal welfare we want. So we have the ingredients, we have lots of those exciting ingredients, but with a group like we have today, that's where we, need to come around and say, what can we do to actually inherently put into it the animal welfare that we want to track. So what we're talking about, and I mean, we make dairy management software. So we're asking ourselves that question: how do we put into it protocols that we think are actually ethical and tie into the welfare of the animals? How do we make those easy to actually tell whether or not those protocols are being adhered to? How do we use technology in a way where it's not just, throwing those ingredients in and hoping for the best, but that we're designing it with these ideas in mind? And in my opinion, until we start to think through the end goal, we're going to create technology for an end that is tied to whoever is making that technology. And so if that end is economics, then that's what we're going to create. And so until we're intentional about combining those things together in a way, then we're not going to get there. And that's why, a day like today is so important, because it gets us all thinking about how to bake this into our processes. So, yeah, Stacey, that's how we think about it here.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Kelly, I'll hand the question over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And Sherry, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And your background is incredibly unique, kind of having that end engineering. So that's one thing, LRIC, we've actually been looking at, and we've had an initiative going on the past year that we're calling Engineering a Better Farm. And the idea being, there's so much technology that's out there that's available, but that hasn't necessarily made it to farm. And, we've heard all day about silos and about the need for this cross-disciplinary innovation. And I think it really comes down to bringing the right people into the room together. And a big part of that, we're engaging with the departments of engineering at Guelph, certainly, but Waterloo, Windsor, Western, some university and institutions that maybe historically haven't been as involved in agriculture, because there's a huge wealth of knowledge and resources available. And we're not necessarily recreating the wheel, but it's about taking technology that already exists and is developed in other sectors. It's proven it's working. How can we bring that onto farm? And, Desiree mentioned a lot of great ones, technologies available earlier. There's lots, Ag Sites is a great organization in Ontario that's dealing with herd whistle and some of that infrared camera technology. So there's a lot of great things there. I think as far as animal welfare concerns go, anything related to early disease detection, earlier and quicker intervention from vet care, and anything that's going to minimize environmental stress those are all, they have tremendous potential. There is a really great amount of adoption happening as well. I think we're really at the cusp of seeing kind of this technology revolution encroaching onto other industries. Obviously, we've seen a lot in dairy and some of those supply managed organizations that maybe have a little bit more capital. But certainly in, beef and sheep, which were mentioned pretty extensively earlier, I think as that technology becomes more widely available and is more adopted, we're going to see that benefit to animal welfare really increased.
Sorry. Thank you, Kelly. That's a really great overall perspective. I particularly like the fact that you talked about getting organizations involved that weren't traditionally involved in agriculture. I think that's so important. Chris, I'd like to hear your perspective on that question.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to come at this and probably most of the questions from a practical producer perspective, because let's face it, that's who we are. But, I think some of the most promising digital technologies that there are the ones that are speaking to farmers, that are helping reduce the burden of human resources. So we just can't get enough help in farms. And I mean, we're a small farm, 50 to 60 cows. And, with the Creamery obviously added a lot more work on top of that. But, with, for example, like Kelly, you mentioned, we're seeing some of these adoptions into more of the supply management commodities. Well, on top of that, some of these supply management commodities are having to be creative about how they're diversifying, because there just isn't the quota to get to be able to expand your farm. So to expand your farm, to get more human resources to be able to help you out, you kind of get into this bad cycle. And unfortunately, farmers are wearing all hats. Farmers are busy all day, especially this time of the year. So trying to capture the view of a farmer, to get their buy-in, to be able to take the time, or for them to consider the investment that would be needed for digital technologies that are out there, you really need to meet them where they're at. So, some of the digital technologies that, I mean, obviously we have a robot. I can tell you that when we moved from our old tie stall facility back in 2012 into our milking robotic automated milking system facility, it was hands down the best thing that we've ever done. So we gather more data out of our robot. We're able to see, higher, so we can detect higher bacteria levels in cows, treat much earlier if need be. We can see if, their progesterone has changed. And so, are they pregnant, and reducing vet bills and things like that. Although I would say, like there's nothing better than a good old standard herd health. So, we might have the data there, but sometimes it's just being able to speak to the farmer on how meeting them where they're at with the issues that they might be facing on the farm. And so larger farms have a harder time just getting enough people to get it, to come in and milk the cows, 3 times a day or whatever it might be. And I think this is across the board in a lot of the commodities, especially within livestock farming. So, there's just not enough help in this world in really any industry. But of course, if people want good quality food, it's got to come from the farm. So this is, it's sad. So I think that we're seeing a lot of these digital technologies, and farmers are starting to do it, but it's really sometimes getting them to see the value in it, and taking the time to be able to do that. But, some of the other great things is for example, virtual fencing. Like, this is fantastic. Like, it probably has its quirks to work through, but there's lots of opportunities to be able to adopt these practices on the farm, given that the capital investment is possible. And so for smaller farms, sometimes that's harder. But for us, you mentioned we were hit by a tornado and 2 tornadoes within a month. And what we did was we chose to put in a higher quality camera system, something very simple. And it allows us to see into our calving pen. It allows us to check, what's happening in the milking end. So do we have cows in heat? Are they jumping on other cows? So we're able to keep an eye on the barn with less help than it is by being in the barn all the time. So in my opinion, I really think that the promising technology is allowing farmers to see the benefit that it has and reducing the burden of workload that it has on the farm.
Do you mind if I comment on that? Because Chris, I have to say, do you know what? We've heard that so often from our dairy farmers to the point where we actually pivoted with our first 2 deliverables to tie to staffing, because we actually found that staffing was the same thing. So we have like a integrated shift scheduler and a combined to-do list. A lot of that was tied to, finding that there is a connection between staffing and people, like just almost the most basic things, and animals. And I remember one case that I was looking into, which was a coliform outbreak. And after all of this data analysis, connecting everything together, trying to figure out why this happened, it was that, this outbreak stemmed from about 7 animals that were milked one after the other when they all calved on the same day. And why did they calve on the same day? Because they had 15 calves born that night and the staff couldn't keep up and they made a mistake. And when you start to look into these welfare issues, often you find that it's people, it's not necessarily making mistakes, right? Everybody makes mistakes, but it's not having the support and the processes to back that up. And so what you're saying like completely echoes, what we're hearing too, and how we're changing what we're doing.
And if I can, I don't want to derail things too much, but I love that you mentioned specifically getting producers involved right from the get-go. So that's one thing with this Engineering a Better Farm that LRIC's been working on, is where we sourced these kind of needs and challenges on farm that have a potential engineering solution was from really innovative producers in each commodity. And so we created this document that has kind of the 6 overarching themes, and by far the biggest one across every sector and every commodity was automation of tasks, just because the labor shortage is so real there. And just having that kind of early collaboration with producers really enables us to kind of zero in and make sure that anything that's being generated from this is filling an actual need. But yeah, certainly a really big theme that we saw across every commodity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's great. And that actually ties into the next question I have, which really gets down to the practicalness of a farm being a business. So what do you see as keeping in mind that the farm is a business for all the producers? We've been talking about animal welfare. Does animal welfare sell products? From a business perspective, what incentive is there for producers to adopt these technologies that improve animal welfare? And we'll start with you, Kelly.
So this was interesting, and I have to admit, I'm really interested to hear Chris's perspective on this in particular. But so one thing that we come across in every study that's done kind of gauging consumers' intent as or what drives them, there's 3 main themes. It's their health and health of their family, the health of the environment, and the health of the animal. And it sounds, in these survey responses, it's really lofty and high-minded, which is great, and the intent is there. But when we see it in practice at the grocery store level, we consistently see that producers aren't willing to pay more, especially right now where we're seeing a higher level of inflation. Unless there's an added value to that product, thinking like omega eggs, we're not seeing the return that these surveys might initially indicate, where producers are saying, yes, we're committed to this, but ultimately when it comes down to the actual buying, it's not there. So then it becomes a question of how else do we incentivize animal welfare at the farm level if it's not coming at that consumer product price point. And I think a big part of that is, yes, farming is a business, absolutely. But profitable animals are the ones with better animal welfare, better management, I think. And unfortunately, the producers aren't getting recognition at that stage when they're doing it. Thinking of the beef industry, right, at the cow-calf level, they're not the ones direct marketing to the stores and to these feeder programs. So they're doing everything right and bringing in all of these animal welfare technologies and high management standards. why would they be doing that all along if they're not the ones and marketing that product? Well, it's because those animals, when animal welfare is a consideration in that high level of management, right from the minute that calf hits the ground, you have a healthier animal, which ultimately becomes a more profitable animal. As you know, we love, as producers and farmers, they care about their stock. They see it as much more than a business. And arguably, I think that's pretty well understood that producers do care, right? We've talked all day about the stress level that they are under and kind of the impact that animal welfare can have as far as human welfare as well. So there's definitely that emotional, that really strong, compassionate angle. But at the end of the day, it's a business. And so that's where I think those two drivers really do intertwine, because yes, we care about the animals and we want them to have the highest standard of welfare. And that in turn does increase their profitability long term. It's just consumers don't always recognize that.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll turn it over to Chris.
So this is by far probably the question that I can speak the most on. So one of the biggest lessons learned from building a creamery and having a farm gate retail is it, and dealing directly to consumer. And these were conversations obviously we weren't having before as a sole producer, is that we live and breathe this world of caring for our animals, caring for our land as farmers. That is who we are. If we didn't love what we, are doing, we wouldn't be doing it. It's dedication, commitment, lifestyle. This is who we are as people. And so we assume in this world, I think, that other people understand your lifestyle and understand what it is that you're doing. But really, when we look at human behavior, humans are fairly we really don't understand other people's experiences unless we've experienced it ourselves. So this is one of the points for us to build a creamery, because we can, as producers, sit here every day and say we're taking great care of our animals. We love our animals. I mean, for us in our barn, every cow is a pet. It is hard for us to lose one of our milking cows. And that's just who we are as people. And I believe that's who a lot of farmers are. So when we try to translate into the experience and the buying experience for consumers, they don't understand that. And so we don't do a great job at marketing it. Farmers are not as open as maybe we should have been in many years past. I do see that sort of somewhat changing. And so we're asking people to understand what it is that we live and breathe every day without living and breathing for it every day. And so this is where these, in my opinion, we have an on-farm creamery. We have a live stream from our store into our barn. And we did that. That was also a benefit when the tornado hit, because we were able to make that upgrade to our camera system to include into our security system within the creamery so that we can teach. And you have to meet people where they're at. Some people don't want it, like they don't want to learn, and that's okay. But when they're going to the grocery store and they're looking at a product on the shelf, they're going to buy the cheapest product because that's where our economy is in right now. So they need to really feel like what you're doing with your animals is the best thing for those animals. We get asked these questions all the time. How do you take care of the animals? They can see it on the camera in the store. So we're able to give them that visibility into what it is that we do on farm. And when there's questions, we're able to answer them on the spot, on the go, all the time. We also do open houses on the farm, which allows people to come on and they can meet our cows. And so absolutely biosecurity issue there. You can't have your cake and eat it too. We really believe the education piece behind what we're doing and how we take care of our animals is the key to us in terms of a profitable business. And I do see that as a trend with all the communication and the strategies that we have taken so far to give people the information if they so desire to want it. So in my opinion, this is animal welfare for the general population. Huge, huge. They care a lot about it, but they don't know enough about it to understand the full realm of what it means to take care of animals. And so one of the biggest questions we get asked, why do we take calves away from moms? So, and I get the question. I'm a mom, and so it's working through the information as to why that happens. What does the environment look like when if we were to leave calves with moms, for example? It even has me going to look at research to say, like, has this even been looked at from a research perspective to say, like, is this the best thing for the animals? So when we're constantly doing tours, private tours, guided tours, we're talking about the welfare of the animal almost all the time.
No, that's really great, and really breaking down that wall between the producers and their customers, the end customers, is a really important piece for that public education of really what happens on farm, and as you said, those animal welfare pieces. And I remember speaking to you before about the camera in your retail outlet, and saying, like, people would just stand there and then watch the cows in the store. I think that piece is so important. I'll come back to that in questions later, but Sherry, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, and I find it so shocking. I was at an event on Wednesday that wasn't, because most of the events I go to are tied to dairy. So you end up in a bit of an echo chamber, but it was completely unrelated, most of the people. And talking to somebody, oh yeah, do you drink milk? Yeah, no, we stopped drinking milk because they're like mean to cows, right? And I'm just like, what? What are you talking about? And somehow maybe there's the psychology of it when we're talking about business, right? There's human psychology that we're always more cautious about loss. We'll put more into preventing loss than we will put into gains. And maybe we have to look at this as a business as preventing that loss, because there's people that literally stop drinking milk because of a concept that is rooted in almost no reality. You have that conversation and they're like, well, yeah, because factory farms, right? In Canada, like there's like thousands and thousands of them like crammed together, and they're really mean, and you're just like, where are you getting this? This is not like, can you tie this into the reality of driving up Highway 6 in Ontario and seeing, small farm after small farm, or anything tied to anything experiential? And the answer for a lot of people is pretty much no. They kind of don't notice the actual farms in their community, and they haven't visited them. And that's why work like this to actually educate people is so key. Because when we talk about, will they pay more? There's debates as to whether or not they'll pay more, but will they stop using dairy? I mean, I'm talking from that perspective. They will. And I mean, people make lots of choices for lots of reasons, but a reason that's not rooted in the reality of their decision making is not necessarily a good decision for them when there's a healthy product out there. That is, milk's one of the most complete foods out there. So there's good reasons to not take it off the table. So I think that's one of the concepts. I know for me, I get extremely frustrated when I also work out on in the beef sector too. When I talk to people that believe that they're being very welfare conscious when they eat something that's stamped antibiotic free. And as a vet, I've gone to the feedlots that are antibiotic free, and I am not a big fan of those. Judicious use of antibiotics, yes, but people don't necessarily connect the usage of drugs or antibiotics with what they're like, it's all in the same pool, right? It had a sign on it, it had a stamp on it, so I must be doing something good. And I think sometimes some of the labeling doesn't necessarily let us do the best job we can and the most ethical job we can when it comes to animal welfare, because being not treating an animal that needs a treatment to me is a problem. So I think sometimes having, again, this is why this group of people is so important, to get the right people together to say, what actually is the best as far as, as far as our choices here, or what type of farm we're trying to create here. And Marian Dawkins, right at the start of things, touched on that. So, I mean, to summarize, I think education is huge, right? Not focusing on necessarily people paying more, but stopping people from not using. And then finally, making sure that what we are calling animal welfare, or what we give that, gold stamp to, actually aligns with what's best for animals.
Maybe we can take a question from online. I see a question from Rachel. Given that consumers are likely not interested in paying more for enhanced welfare products, what kind of return on investment do producers need from welfare enhancing technology to adopt?
Do you want
So-
someone in particular to take that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with Chris on that one, if you have
Yeah.
a comment.
So the question is, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so consumers are likely not interested in paying more for enhanced welfare products. So what kind of return on investment do producers need from welfare enhancing technology for adoption?
So I don't know if it's so much of, so in my opinion, I think the animal welfare technology that's needed is transparency from the consumer buying in the grocery store. They need to know, like, if a consumer. So, I mean, first of all, there's no certification, there's no sort of niche branding on animal welfare practices. Maybe that's where we need to go. I don't know. Where you have to meet certain standards to be able to say that, you're taking care of your animals in a certain, within the appropriate ways. Within dairy, we have ProAction, third-party company coming in to evaluate us, yearly on this. So, but the return on investment really, like that, I mean, from our perspective, we have to have a premium price on our milk, because there's a lot more work going into it, and we don't get the same price breaks in terms of the supplies that are put into it, packaging, even inefficiencies. So, we do VAT pasteurization, and it's very slow, but it is actually one of the best things for milk, is to actually pasteurize milk at a low temperature and minimally beat it up. And so, it takes a lot more time, it takes a lot more energy, a lot more heat to slowly heat it up, and so on. So, the right market segment is going to pay that. If you are expecting that a premium dairy product is going to go to the shelves in a Loblaws and going to do well, there isn't enough labeling. In my opinion, there's not enough labeling that you can actually get it onto the shelves where consumers are going to look at that labeling, understand exactly what that labeling means, to be able to say, it's better for me to buy this milk over this milk, for example. So, that I think that it becomes down to the return on investment for the animal welfare technology comes down to branding it yourself and doing it on a smaller scale versus looking at a Saputo type of a situation. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my stab at it.
And just another comment on the transparency, like one of the examples that we're looking through, for instance, is dehorning protocols, right? So there's lots of places that are doing a great job with dehorning, right? They have the right pain management, they have the right timing, they have all of that down. And so sometimes, like tied to the transparency piece, it's not something that has to be more or less expensive. It's just highlighting the people that are really good at those things, right? If they've got the timing down as to when they're doing dehornings and they're not necessarily waiting too late, or then why not create some sort of benefit for farmers that are achieving those things. So sometimes there's not necessarily a cost other than the cost of being vigilant.
Mm-hmm. And then so that goes to say, like, the other thing that we're not good at telling people that's hard to understand is that, you know, we will choose a polled genetic over like a horn genetic for the purpose of the fact that we don't want to dehorn. So, you know, how do you explain that to the consumer for them to say, you know what, they're making a very diligent effort to not have to put animals through this, even through their breeding practices. So it's just really tricky I mean, it's a complex world. And so, I mean, the industry's complex and we live and breathe it every day. But how do we communicate that and be transparent to that, to the person that's thinking about maybe paying a little bit extra for a product on the shelf?
And I think the ROI question is really important too, because we talk a lot about the technologies today have typically been, you know, a physical investment, whether that's, you know, the virtual fencing and it's a collar, and that's a huge expense. For currently the price point is likely not realistic for most producers. But then we do have a lot of lower upfront capital investment kind of technologies that can still help with this. And there's, just as an example, there's the Vets On app available now, right? Where you can virtually connect with a large animal vet, get non-emergency care extremely quickly, medication, treatment, that kind of thing. So, and that's about a $30 appointment to have a virtual call with a vet. So there's not all of it is a huge upfront cost, but those that are, you know, there is more than just the animal welfare that goes into it, right? Like there's a lot of efficiency that's built into those products as well that helps on those human resource angles. So while the welfare enhancing tech is there, there's a lot of other considerations to justify the ROI. It's not strictly animal welfare, but that's a huge component of it. And I think we just kind of sometimes need to wrap our head around the fact that it's not always a big on-farm piece of equipment that's going to be required to enhance animal welfare.
I think those are really great perspectives. Kelly, I just want to follow up on the transparency and maybe coming into the policy or impact on policy, since you've done policy work. Where do you see the role of government and or industry organizations to coming up with some kind of way to help that transparency? So for instance, all the dehorning procedures and different kinds of practices that go along with that. So either choosing genetics over physically dehorning to achieve the same goal. Where's the role of policy or I guess larger organizations coming together and helping with that awareness piece to allow consumers to understand that if they go to Loblaws, or for those of you who don't have Loblaws, a large chain, grocery store chain, where you can feel confident that if you choose this product in the grocery store, that the farmers who produce that were very intentional and of meeting animal health and welfare standards. So Kelly, where do you see the role of policy in that?
So I'm reluctant to involve government in too much policy when it comes to animal welfare practices. And I can see my co-panelists smiling at that. And I think it's because we have this familiarity, right? We talked about kind of that strong reaction that consumers have emotionally to wanting high standards of animal welfare. Meanwhile, they're maybe not willing to pay for it. So then what happens is we have this strong lobby to government or other policy-making institutions that, you know, this is what we want to see. And then unfortunately, the producers end up absorbing the full cost of that without seeing a premium on the end product. I think you mentioned kind of bringing larger organizations in together to do a better job of telling the story. And I think that's really where we need to head. I think it's not about bringing in more policy. I think it's about doing a better job of telling the story of what's going on with animal welfare, you know, the progress that's happened as well. We need to acknowledge, you know, how much higher these standards are now than even 10, 20 years ago. And I think we need to start rewarding producers accordingly. And the issue with labeling and anything like that is you end up capturing a very small portion of the buyer base, and it becomes almost a niche product because there's limited understanding of it. And with that, limited willingness to pay for it, because ultimately we don't really know what we're paying for, right? So I feel like the government kind of policy angle is not really where we're lacking right now. I think there's still a tremendous amount of oversight. We're really fortunate in Canada as far as our food safety system. I think we have one of the absolute highest standards globally. I think our producers do maintain one of the highest levels of animal welfare, and it's kind of monitored currently on a commodity basis, but that's where I think that cross-sector, cross-commodity voice is so important, because we can lean on each other and kind of learn from some of those past lessons, right? Dairy's got ProAction, which was a huge undertaking, and realistically, it's a big burden on producers. They were willing to do it because they believe in that idea of higher standard, but did they see the return as far as public perception that it generated more good faith or education? No, exactly, right? So then it becomes, well, if we were already holding ourselves to this standard independently, why are we going through this administrative and bureaucratic burden if we're not seeing any kind of public awareness increase? So I think anytime we bring in a policy as an individual commodity group that's being kind of pushed onto your producers, and that doesn't mean they're not already doing the practice. A lot of times it's just a matter of a more formal documentation process or investigative process and audits and that kind of thing, and that higher level of traceability that we can verify this practice is happening. But we're putting a big burden on these producers who aren't seeing the return. And I think doesn't even necessarily fit return always, but just that idea of, kind of gaining back some public trust potentially.
Right. That's great. Thank you. Elizabeth Strand asks in the chat, what are the barriers to telling the story well, making sure people understand the care that is already going into animal welfare? So very similar to what Kelly was just talking about. And I'll ask Sherry that question.
Yeah, I think it really starts at the animal itself and understanding what those animals need. Because what I see is sometimes somewhat like misguided attempts to create a positive situation for an animal without realizing, you have somebody who's rescued a cow and, but it's standing alone in a field, and, it's like, well, these are herd animals, or it's in concrete in a warehouse with with this family that's rescued, and you're like, concrete for it. So I think if you don't understand the animal first and what their needs are, because they're different for every species, then you're never gonna get there. Once you have that understanding of what you're actually trying to create, then it's a whole educational piece tied to that, because tied to the government piece. When you start to mandate things, like for example, we talked about dehorning protocols. If you mandate a dehorning protocol, but yet somebody's going above and beyond and getting pulled animals so that you don't even have to dehorn, I would say that is even more optimal. So with some of these things, they're moving. And you have to understand the concepts behind it in order to be able to not just connect with the protocol itself as it stands today. So, I mean, I think we could do so much more to educate kids in schools, to connect them with, understanding that different species need different things. And a lot of the things that you might see in a farm are tied to the needs of that specific species that kind of the public, it just kind of glosses over their eyes. So one of my favorite exercises when I was back in vet school was to ask the public their top 3 welfare issues, a veterinarian their top 3 welfare issues, a farmer their top 3 welfare issues. And that was such a great starting point. Because I remember being on a plane and talking to somebody, and they were like, I think it's so cruel that cows are milked so often. It'd be so much nicer if they just milk them once every 3 days, something like that. And it's like, talk to a new mother, new mother who potentially has a new, a young baby, and ask her how comfortable it is to go, 6, 8, 12 hours. like I think some of these things really tie into the whole biology conversation, that educational pieces of the whys, and then the hows will make sense. And then we'll get some really great hows.
That's a really great perspective. I think more and more of our population is urbanized. So there's the really lack of awareness about what a farm looks like, for regardless of what a modern farm looks like, but even just what these animals are about and what they're like, and having any real engagement with them. But I do think that education piece is really, really important to changing perspectives. Are there any other questions from the audience? This is your last chance. We're about to wrap up. It's been a very productive day. I think this discussion, again, brings together so many of the different topics and themes we've seen throughout the day. Chris, I wanted to come back to one thing you talked about, that education about, and really relating to what producers do. And you have a 50 to 60 cow operation, and you bring people on the farm into your retail store. That's a certain scale. You can educate at that certain scale. So do you have any ideas about how you might scale up that education piece?
So this would be a dream, alongside. So the other piece that I would love to see on our farm is we actually do care farming for Dementia Day programming, to use the farm and purposes to be able to provide purposeful activity for people living in the community with dementia. But that's my side story. But the other dream and the reason for the Creamery was to really increase the education and allow people to see what we see, and for at least the opportunity to see what we see. And I echo everything Sherry says about understanding the animal first. And the reason I echo that is because we do several tours. We spend a lot of time touring people, and you should see their faces when they go into the robot room and they watch the robot work. And then we explain to them exactly what this robot's doing, what the benefit of the robot is for a cow. Instead of just looking at it as a mechanical automation, we're able to say, we understand this about the cow determined on their lactation gets this much, robot pellet determined, it's very unique. They come and go when they want. A lot of the times they ask the question, well, how do they know to go? And it's like, well, as a woman, you feel full. And if you feel full, you want to be milked out, or you want to feed your baby. And so this is something that we can then put that experience and that understanding to what the cow needs to understand that, we are doing the best for these animals. And my last thing that I think that the real difficult part here, and maybe this is for the group to take away, is that this transference of information is so slow. It's so slow in the grand scheme of the society, because number one, people are so detached from how their food is made, and some of them just don't care. They think food comes from a grocery store. And, how do we get into those people's worlds? How do we give them that information? How do we tweak that interest to say, this is what, commodities are doing? And I was raised on a broiler breeder farm, so I understand chicken farming. And, how do we explain that to people and get the information out? And if there's one thing I've learned from being in retail, you think the message is going to go out, you think the word of mouth is going to be fast, and really you just have to be patient with it. So there needs to be some kind of plan to say, we're going to give this education to the community, and we're going to do it, and we're going to be patient with it, and we're going to continue the momentum doing it, because I think we lose that. Like dairy has ProAction, and when do you ever see them put that into their social media or anything like that? Like it's not really talked about. So I think we need to be diligent about the technologies we're using, and maybe some of that technology is in marketing. And how do we market this? Because what I really don't want to see, in terms of commodities, and this is a pet peeve of mine being somebody in retail, is that we're slapping a label on a packaging and people are using it the wrong way. And so, and then basically the rest of it's irrelevant now because they're using labeling for the benefit of their business versus really representing the industry that they're coming from.
That's fantastic, Chris. So in the interest of time,
Maybe there is maybe it's not a question, it's more of a query from Rachel.
yeah,
She's wondering about, hey, do you know any government grants that could assist the producers in upfront costs?
There are some grants that come out from time to time tied to adoption of technology. Rachel, I can look through and get you. I know I've seen some relatively recently, and there's some of them out there for adoption of digital technologies, and those digital technologies could be technologies tied to, animal welfare. And yeah, Chris, tied to that, I mean, we're actually investigating how to create a really accurate marketing campaign to kind of go into dairies and not focus on selling what we're doing or anything, but just simply pushing the industry forward. So this is a call to action to me to chat with you after this, because I think a lot of us have the same goal, right? We all do better when we live in reality.
Right. Fantastic. Well, let's give a round of applause to all the speakers from the industry panel.
thank you so much.
So as we bring this insightful and thought-provoking day to the close, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to all our esteemed speakers and participants. Professor Marian Dawkins from Oxford University, she opened the discussions today morning with a compelling exploration of potential and challenges of integrating technology into farming. She clearly pointed out, hey, you have to ensure animal welfare as a priority and create a delicate balance between efficiency and care. Dr. Boivin from INRA France enriched our understanding of farm-animal dynamics. He emphasized significance of past interactions and the profound impact of new technologies on these relationships. His ethological perspective underscored the need for mindful implementation of smart farming practices. Professor Dr. Clara Mancini from the Open University UK introduced us to the ethical dimensions of animal-computer interactions. It's very broad. She really stirred the pot. Her call to design engaging and respectful interactive systems for animals highlighted our growing responsibility as technology becomes more pervasive in farming. Dr. Desiree Galatly from Olds College, Alberta, she addressed the practical aspects of technology access in livestock production, offering valuable strategies. How do we go about it? How do we implement it? What are the ways we could deploy advancements that could be within reach for all farmers and farmer levels, promoting efficiency and welfare? Professor Dr. Elizabeth Strand from the University of Tennessee, United States, brought a unique blend of sociology, faith, and veterinary social work to our discussions on human-animal, companion animal, and farm animal interactions. Her holistic approach reminded us of the profound emotional and social bonds we share with the animals. Of course, lastly, our industry panel members, Dr. Vanderpool, Shari Vanderpool, Kelly Somerville, Chris Petit, they provided a diverse array of perspectives from industry leaders, reinforcing the real-world applications from the practical perspective of how do we implement it, what are the implications of the adoption of technology in the interface of HCFAI. So it was a really intriguing insightful and practical, especially when real life examples and analogies were shared. They were really thought-provoking and able to resonate with many of the audiences here. So I will be reaching out to the speakers. We have been looking at writing a perspectives or opinion article with many of the speakers here. For the audience, I really encourage you to carry forward the knowledge, ideas, and inspiration from today's sessions. Let's try to integrate technology in ways that can enhance animal welfare, create sustainable farming practices, and foster compassionate relationship between the humans and animals. So I invite Dr. Stacey to say a few words.
Thank you. Yes, I also really enjoyed today's discussions. From my perspective, what was the most interesting was just to bring together, I guess, to start the transdisciplinary conversation that Dr. Strand talked about. I think that all of these different perspectives, I heard every one of our speakers really respecting their discipline and the disciplines that they interact with, and the need and I guess the call to action for all of us to work together to move this forward and to continue these conversations. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you everyone for joining us. I know we had many great interactions online. And so hopefully you'll continue interacting with each other and reach out to us as well if you have more questions. So we will be posting the all the talks on Suresh's YouTube channel, Moo TV, I believe it's
Moo Analytica.
Moo Analytica, my apologies. So if you missed any of the talks, you'll be able to catch them there. And also if you want to go back and reflect on, there was a lot of information and a lot of different resources provided by the speakers today, a lot of things to reflect on. So really invite you to just continue engaging in this topic going forward. And thank you again for your participation today.
Thank you all for your active participation and engagement. You have a wonderful evening. Bye.